question then that the mystics ask is, if the purpose of existence is to come to this unity of God, then why did God see the need to manifest the cosmos at all? God had God's unity, and that unity was achieved. Why go through this whole...
It wasn't achieved, it just
is, right.
It will be. Like
That's right. So why go through this whole process? And the Kabbalists read it as a very painful process. God has to contract God's self in this act of tzimtzum, and so why go through the whole thing? And the Kabbalists and later the Hasidic masters answer something very beautiful. It's probably borders on heresy, if not outright heresy, but the Kabbalists don't mind that, it seems.
They can get away with it.
They say that God's unity before the existence of anything else, and even to say before is a nonsensical term in that context, right? Is a unity which has no multiplicity, and in that it's lacking something. The unity which is achievable through the creation of the world is a diverse unity. To say that God is lacking something and is itself a high heresy. So this balance between this pure unadulterated unity, where there's entire sameness and there's no differentiation, that God had already in some sense, but it wasn't interesting. It was lacking something, and what it was lacking was diversity. What it was lacking was was me and you, and our idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, my 12-year-old Mendel pipes up and he's like, okay, but there was no concept of diversity before you created diversity. There was no the answer is like, why did God have to create a world like this? Is because in order for us to have real pleasure and godlike pleasure, a real hana, a real tainug, whatever word we're going to put on it, you need to you need to work for it, right? You need to create it. I'm like, well, you created the laws of nature that we have to work that way and that it has to function that way. Create it that we could have the ultimate pleasure without any of this.
So it's very clear that the answers that the Kabbalists are giving are not a priori. They're not speaking from God's position forward. They're speaking from our position backwards. They're saying what do we have now, and what was necessary in doing this, and what is the deepest of our experiences where we can encounter godliness, and how may we see that as being the purpose of creation. And I think that there's something quite beautiful in that way of looking backwards. It may not be philosophically rigorous in the sense that this makes sense from God's perspective forward, but if we look backwards, the sense of where do we encounter the greatest divinity within ourselves? Is it when we are lost and we have no individuality, or is it when we're most capable of fully being ourselves and manifesting the divinity that is Mendel, the divinity that is Zevi? And in that deepest self-expression, there's a beautiful, beautiful Hasidic idea. I think it's from the Piasetzner. He writes that we speak about Moses, the giver of the Torah, as the Bible calls him the most humble man who ever walked the face of the earth. And later Jewish literature refers to him as this channel that just godliness poured through his throat, that the Shekhinah spoke through his mouth. And the Piasetzner, I believe it was, writes that God did not speak through Moses as if Moses was some sort of vacant, empty vessel because he was so wiped clean of himself and therefore God could just pour through, which is generally how we conceptualize it. He says instead that Moses was so fully himself, so fully manifesting what it was to be Moses, that he was manifesting God as Moses, through the cosmos expressing as himself. And I think that in that perspective, there's a real beauty.